can open up to 1 Kings. It's in the Old Testament, chapter 19. We're going to be there today. As we continue our series, Elevate, you guys notice we have a new door, and so we'll be using that at some point. But today we're going to be talking about managing our moods. And I want you just to ask your neighbor, and maybe a better way to be to elbow them and say, "Are you moody today?" Okay, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. What are you, crazy? What are you, crazy? You don't know what's going to spill out there. You don't ask somebody that. Come on, we're in church. Keep your composure. But isn't that true? Do we put like a circle around some of our strongest emotions because we don't want to express them? And so today we're going to talk about managing our moods. The movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie, it's kind of a fun way for children to kind of learn about emotions. But I think adults, I don't think we really grasp what emotions really are, what their purpose is. A lot of us deny that we have emotions, but we do. But in the movie, they kind of depict it in a way that I think is helpful, that some are more joy-oriented, some are disgust, angry, fearful, or sad. And they kind of have some fun with it of how, if you could picture inside your head, how your emotions are kind of pushing the buttons and managing your life. And the movie gets some things right, but it gets some things wrong, okay? Your emotions don't drive your life. It's not as it seems. There is some choice in it. We'll talk about that today. For some, their strategy in life is just to contain these strong emotions, to kind of keep them at bay so it doesn't wreak havoc in their life. But is that biblical? Is it biblical to just contain our emotions? Or were some of the most godly people free of emotions? I think sometimes we get that idea, or maybe they just had the good kind, like joy and adoration, praise, thanksgiving, gratitude, all those. But did they experience strong emotions like fear or sadness or anger and disgust? What are emotions? I think we have to kind of get back at that. I mean, in the Bible, if you read Psalms and you come away with everybody's happy in the Bible, you read it wrong. I mean, there's all sorts of emotions that these psalmists depict in these songs because life is full of these emotions. So we need to kind of ask ourselves, what are emotions? Well, if you look in the dictionary, you're going to come away more confused. So I'm not going to have you do that. There's several definitions, and I wish they were helpful. But one of the last ones that they say to kind of summarize these definitions is this. They boil it down to this. Something that causes such a reaction, okay? Literally in the dictionary. What are emotions? Something that causes such a reaction. Let me ask you, has anybody asked you, why are you being so emotional? Has anybody ever said that? Or have you caught yourself saying that? You're basically saying, what they are saying is, what is that something that's causing such a reaction? I just don't get it. Help me understand that. What is that something that's causing such a reaction? You know, and the funny thing is, we don't always know. I mean, have you ever asked somebody, why are you being so emotional? And they're like, you know, they give you like a couple things, but it has no rationale. They don't even know. They don't even know why they're experiencing such powerful reactions to an event. But sometimes it's obvious, other times it's not. It kind of comes out of nowhere. But it's important for us to understand, this is something I didn't always understand, but emotions are not feelings. Now I'll explain here in a moment, but emotions are not feelings. There are actually two different kinds of expressions about how we feel. And I love this. Some of the guys are like, really? We're talking about emotions today? Yes, you're going to get in touch with your emotions today, okay? But here, emotions, it really means to emote. Emote means something comes out of you, emote. And so you emote is a physical, affective state. It's something that it's deep within you that's an actual occurrence in your body. You may emote anger, you may emote sadness, or emote joy, but it's something that comes out of you. Imagine you're in a container and you have all of these emotions inside of you, and somebody kind of bumps you, and they're kind of spilling out. Well, you have emotions inside of you, and somebody has the fortune of getting whatever's inside of you, all right? So some of you guys are like, whoa, this is mind-blowing. It is, I know. Well, feelings, so what are they? Feelings are your interpretations of your emotions. That's why it's important to ask people, what are you feeling right now? And trying to express it. So you express your emotions through these words of feelings. You're trying to interpret what's going on inside, all right? You say, I feel, and then you try to describe your emotion. So when someone is angry, it's a physical thing that's happening. They're experiencing physical symptoms like elevated blood pressure, skin is hot to the touch, very loud voice. You're like, I'm not angry, but you're yelling. And there's something else about anger. Their mental control goes haywire. It's inhibited. It's like they're not thinking because they're so full of this emotion of anger. It's a response to that something or someone, and you're lashing out at them. But here's the deal. Emotions, though they're beneath, though they're hidden, they are somewhere in this elevator, okay? And now these emotions may come from the basement or the double basement if they have a parking garage. It may go from really dark places of sadness, of resentment. Some of these things you just stuff, you don't even want to know that it's in the building. But they're way, 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 way down deep. And sometimes they come out of that. Sometimes they're up at the penthouse, the very tippy top of joy and elation, and they're just, it's euphoric. And so we have these kind of ups and we have these downs of life. And so this is the point. And get this, okay? So you, for the most part, have a choice about the emotions that you have. For the most part, okay? That's what I said. Sometimes they come out of you, all right? But for the most part, there is a choice involved in emotions. In other words, and this is the big point today, is you can manage your moods, or the alternative, your moods can manage you. That's kind of the point. And you have the choice. You have some choice in how much you allow your emotions to run your life. So we need to learn then, how do we manage these emotions? How do we not get overrun by them? Interestingly, a child as young as 2, does anybody have a 2-year-old in here? Okay, we got a 2-year-old. Do anybody have a 3-year-old? Because that's kind of, okay, we got kind of in the house 3-year-olds. All right, whoop, we got both. So, okay, so at 2 or 3, a child learns something interesting. And all of you are almost doing it right now, except for some of you are not. But most of you, smile for me. Smile, just smile. At 2 or 3 years old, a child learns to smile even though they're upset. They're not happy. They learn to put on a smile. And so we have learned and grown up to put on a smile that's contrary to maybe what we're, emoting. We try to just put on a smile, act right. Your mom would be like, act right, we're in church. Smile at the preacher, smile at grandma so-and-so, hug grandma so-and-so. And they're just putting on a smile. And so it's interesting because we've learned basically to mask our strong feelings. So we don't want to, or strong emotions, we don't want to let them out. And so we can carry on with little detection. Many people just don't even know anything's going on, but underneath you have this elevator of emotions, and you're going through life like, what am I going to get today? But listen, as soon as we blow our lid, somebody's going to say, why are you so emotional? Where's this coming from? And so we have to learn how to manage these strong emotions, or they'll end up managing us. So we're going to explore the emotional life of Elijah. And it's interesting because in the Bible, you don't have a lot of test subjects that are good, that deal with depression, that deal with anger, or in some cases, violence, aggression. You don't really have many good people in the Bible that are struggling with that per se. But in the life of Elijah, we see this up, the highest height and the lowest low, and they're sandwiched together chapter to chapter. Okay, so the first one that we see, and I'm going to go super quick on this, is an up, okay? In chapter 18, we see this amazing encounter that Elijah has with these prophets of Baal. They basically have a contest of whose God is better. And this is a kind of a contest between that's happening in Israel right now. You know, the king and his wife Jezebel, they're basically like introducing Baal worship to replace God worship. And so the God that led them out of Egypt is now being replaced by this foreign god called Baal. So 400 prophets of Baal show up, and they're basically putting a contest between Elijah and his God. And through extraordinary circumstances, they pray, nothing happens. They cut themselves, nothing happens. They do all these sorts of emotional acts, to please their God, and nothing happens. And then Elijah pours water on his altar, making it even more impossible. And he says with one prayer, and Elijah sees, and the people see the fire of God pouring down on that altar, and everybody's left in awe. They're like, God is real, and God is for Israel. And so through this, not only were these 400 prophets of Baal put to shame, but they're also put to death. So there's some violent aspects of this that because they did this contest, they basically forfeited their position. And then they ended up getting axed. And so this is a high moment. This is, wow, this couldn't get any better than this. It happened on the Mount of Carmel where God is just showing up. So they are on this mountain or this peak experience that is happening. But I mean, this is the time for him to advance. This is the time for him to, use this to catapult into really taking the leadership and all that stuff and bringing it back to God. But we see that this moment to move forward, he has this experience like a rubber band that snaps him back to earth. And the very next chapter, he is not going up anymore, but he is, boom, he is going down. I mean, the higher they go up, the harder they fall. And we see this interesting account in the next chapter. And so in the first two verses, we see that King Ahab told his wife Jezebel everything that Elijah had done. And this made her so angry. She was so filled with anger that she responded in verse 1 and 2 saying, if I don't kill him within 24 hours, I'll be ready to kill myself. So she's putting out this threat, and it goes across the wire, and it reaches Elijah's ear. And you would think, for a man of God who just stood down 400 prophets of Baal, that one little threat wouldn't mean anything. But you would be wrong. You'd be mistaken. It hits him like a ton of bricks. And so he's been a fearless leader for 3 years, standing up for what God is, the real God of Israel, trying to turn them back to God. And then one woman says one threat, and he is all of a sudden becomes frightened, and he runs out to the desert and becomes depressed. You're asking, Elijah, why are you being so emotional? Like, why are you reacting like this? Where's this coming from? But we'll see. Sometimes we don't always get to understand the whole picture, but we'll see in this account how human he is. Verse 3, Elijah was afraid for his life. Or Elijah was afraid, so we see that's his emotional state, is being afraid, and his action and reaction was to run for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, which is like a juniper small tree. And so he sat down under it and prayed that he might die. I mean, that is some serious stuff. That's call 911, get this guy some help. So he says he wants to die. Now, next part here. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. Now, Elijah was a prime candidate for depression. He was physically tired. I mean, he ran this journey to get away from this threat, and he's physically tired. Secondly, he's emotionally exhausted. I mean, the guy has spent years trying to turn the people back to God. I mean, it takes a lot of emotional effort to pour your heart out like that. And he's exhausted. He's spent. And then third, someone had threatened his life. It was, a viable threat, but someone has threatened his life, meaning he has a choice either to confront it or to flee. And he chooses to flee. Now, it's important, everybody do this. Except for 5% of you won't, because 95% of us, and lucky 5% won't, but 95% of us are going to go through a depression state. At some point in our life, something will hit us, we'll be back on our backs, and it'll be hard to get up. Now, for the majority of us, it'll be a minor depression bout. Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, and you'll bounce back. Sometimes that'll happen a couple times. But for some, it's a major blow. I mean, it's something that lasts weeks, months, sometimes years. And it's hard to explain. Why are you so down? Why are you so depressed? Why is it you want to give up and you'd rather die? And we see that Elijah, is a prime candidate for depression. And this brings us to how can we manage our moods? Okay, if this is going to happen, maybe minor, maybe major, but if this is going to happen in our life, how do we manage our moods? How do we, when we get to a place like this, what do we do? And it's a couple things that I want to suggest to you today. And if you're taking notes, they're in the bulletin for you to take home with you. The first one is this, is to understand that moods make us human. Moods make us human. You're not some alien if you have dark moods, or you're way up, you're way down. It doesn't make you some alien. It makes you human. And there's nothing wrong if your moods occasionally swing up or to the south. In many situations, it's perfectly normal to react in such a way, to get down in the dumps, confused about life, and fearful about the future. And this is something that we see in the New Testament when it's looking back at Elijah's life. The Apostle James said, Elijah was a human being, even as we are. We look at the supernatural things that he's doing. He's such a man of God. It's like he's above us all. But James is saying, no, he's a human being just like us. When he prayed, God acted. When we pray, God acts. He's saying he's a human being just like us. He had the same struggles as us. Elijah responded to the threats in his life by getting as far away from them as possible. He said goodbye to his servant, and then he said, I'm going this way, and went a day's journey into the wilderness. Now, the wilderness in the Bible, you'll see it come up quite a bit. We have some wilderness here. You go out hunting, you enjoy the wilderness to get away from it all. And that's how they used the wilderness back then, to kind of get away from it all. But sometimes they had no choice but to go through the wilderness. And the wilderness is a lifeless place. If you're in the wilderness, it means you don't really have a purpose. All your activities just kind of going around and around and around. For him to go out there, he knew there's little water, there's little shelter, and there's little food. So he's positioning himself in a place that's going to be hard for him to survive very long. And he's doing that intentionally. He's saying, God, I feel like dying, and I'm going to actually show you by going out to the wilderness just where I'm at. And so Elijah is not quite to the point of suicide. I don't want you guys getting that picture here. But his actions demonstrate that he wanted nothing to do with life or purpose. He didn't see any purpose in what's going on. So the wilderness is where we go when we're tired of living. We don't move with purpose anymore. We get down and just want to stay down. Life beats us up and we just want to get away from it all. I mean, haven't we all been there? Haven't we all? That's a part of being human. The part of living is that you have some pretty crazy reactions to things sometime. And I love what the message, how it frames this in verse 5. It says, enough of this, God, take my life. I'm ready to join my ancestors in the grave. Exhausted, he fell asleep under the lone broom bush. He's just talking crazy. And God says, you need to sleep. Just go to bed, Elijah. You're talking crazy. Bush. He's full of self-pity. But there's no one there to pity him but himself. There's no wife to hear him out. There's no friend, so you can vent to. This is a party of one. In other words, it's a me party. I don't know, there's a song that's coming in my head, but it's a me party. It's a party of one. And so suddenly an angel shook him, awoke him, and said, "Get up and eat." And verse 6, he looked around, and to his surprise, right by his head were a loaf of bread baked on some coals and a jug of water. He ate the meal and went back to sleep. So God interrupts his pity party and does something very practical. He changes his mood. And he does it by giving him something to eat and giving him something to, giving him some sleep. And some of the most spiritual things you can do when you're down in the dumps, when you're not feeling well, is to eat something and take a nap. I mean, that's the most spiritual thing you can do sometimes, is get yourself something to eat and take a nap. You'll feel differently when you wake up, and maybe you'll be more receptive to instruction. But if you're talking crazy, get something to eat and go to bed. That's doctor's orders. Sometimes that's the case. Now, we wear ourselves out when we continue to ruminate over the situations that we're in. We're trying to figure out a solution, but nothing's coming. And we think, this time it'll be different. Let me think about it some more. And it's the same thing. And it's an easy way to get yourself into a depressed or anxious state. Now, I'm going to give you guys an acronym. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. Maybe it'll be helpful to you. But how to know if you're in or in danger of getting into a depressed or anxious mood. And it's called HALT. HALT. And that's when you're either hungry, angry, you guys should be hangry if you combine those, lonely, and tired. Now, each of these are either a physical or emotional condition that you might find yourself in. But if you stay in these long enough, your tires are going to run thin, your car's going to break down, and you're going to be in some need of some real help. So if you're experiencing any of these, you need to kind of stop and take care of that while it's small before it becomes, greater. That's why this circle strategy, it may sound nice, it may hold your strong feelings at bay, but if you don't deal with those, they become larger issues, sometimes health issues, because these are not taken care of. You might burn out or burn up. So how do we manage our moods? First thing we do is that we need to know that moods are normal. You're going to experience them at some point, and it's just part of being human. Secondly, we need to understand that moods change as we move. Moods change as we move. You'll notice that those moods will stay if you're stagnant or if you're stationary. It doesn't just lift. It only lifts when you move. And we see this in Elijah's life. So verse 7, the angel of God came back, shook him awake again, and said, "Get up and eat some more." Amen, God. I love this picture of God. Get up and eat some more. Amen. We're getting ready for Thanksgiving. Get up and eat some more. You've got a long journey ahead of you. I love that. He's saying, I have plans for you. You need to get up and eat something and eat some more. So he got up and ate and drank his fill, whatever that is, his fill. He was full, and set out. Nourished by that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights all the way to the mountain of God, to Horeb. And when he got there, now look at this, the great visual. When he got there to the mountain of God, he crawled into a cave and went to sleep. Picture that. So exhausted, so spent. He's crawling to the place where God can be found. And he doesn't go up. He doesn't go to the tippy top for a mountaintop experience. Where does he go? He goes in a cave. I mean, yeah, he's trying to find shelter. It's probably practical. But it's like him coming to church, but he's in a cave. He doesn't want to be anywhere around anything dangerous, anything that could be getting him out. So he gets up in a cave. Now, I'm not sure what kind of power bar he had, but that angel gave him something that lasted 40 days and 40 nights. And you guys know I could use some of that 40-day energy bar or energy drink. But it's something of a principle and a promise that we find over and over in the Bible. One of my favorite verses that I've memorized, it comes from Isaiah 40:31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. It comes from a trust in God, and He replenishes you and gives you strength for the journey. And for this, it lasted 40 days. In the Bible, 40 days means completion. That's why Jesus went and fasted 40 days. Moses went up to the mountain 40 days, and that wasn't enough because they rebelled, so he went up 40 days more. But it means completion, usually means completion. And so he completed the journey, and he got there, and he's exhausted. And so we see this being the point where he stopped his mood being so down. He's still in a cave, but this is where we see God actually moving him up. He's positioned at the mountain of God, right where he should be, getting help from God. So in times of trouble, how does this apply? In times of trouble, where do you run? Where do you go to? You're super stressed. Something happens at work. Something happens at home. You're, getting all intense. Where do you run to? Or what should I say? It could be who do you run to, but it could also be what do you run to? Did you know some people have relationships with people and some people have relationships with things? That's true. I mean, that's how addictions get started, is we develop very early on a relationship to something that acts as a substitute for what we really need. And so many people, they won't complete that journey that God says, go to the mountain of God. They won't go to the mountain of God. They'll start it out, but then they'll go run to something else that seems more satisfying. So I'm asking you, the early application is, where do you run? Or who or what do you run to? Do you run to the wilderness? Or do you run to the mountain of God? In other words, what is your source of strength? Where is your source of strength? Is it from your tears, from your pity party? Or is it from the bread of life? So Elijah finds himself at the mountain of God, and instead of going to the top, he gets tired once again. He takes shelter in a cave. And this is where God comes to find him. I love this. I love this about God, is that he's not disappointed with us. Why don't you go up to the top? Some of us get that a lot. I get that a lot, at least. Why didn't you complete the job? Or, things like that. Like, that's super important. I was tired. I rested my feet. And God's like, not disappointed. He comes to him, but he asks this question. And he asks it twice. It's a great question. What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? What are you doing here, Chris? What are you doing here, Martha? What are you doing here, Bruce? What are you doing here, Dennis? What are you doing here, Larry? And Lewis? You both begin with L. What are you doing here? That's a great question. God is personally asking him, and he wants an answer, a truthful answer. What are you doing here? You're in a cave at the mountain of God. You could just come up there and meet me in the heavens. We could have a face-to-face conversation like I did with Moses. What are you doing in a cave? Why are you stopping here? I don't know if he had a good I don't know if I'd have a good answer for that, but we see that he responds. And I like how the Message says it. It says it more like how we would say it today. He says, then the word of God came to him. So, Elijah, what are you doing here? I've been working my heart out for God of the angel armies, said Elijah. What a response to God. I've been working my heart out for you. Honest, being honest. And then he says this, the people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, destroyed the places of worship, and murdered your prophets. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me. Talk about crazy talk. Okay, this guy is talking back to God. He's blaming his people, saying, your plans, God, the ones you made up, the ones I've been following, the ones I've been giving my heart out to, doesn't look like they're happening. In fact, they're going to take me out now. And so he's having this honest conversation here with God. And Elijah, he's being real. He's actually doing what a lot of depressive and pessimistic people do, and how they explain their situations, because people explain them differently. The 3 Ps is what they're called. And you can look these up if you want more information on them from Dr. Segelman. But they're the 3 Ps. And this is what they do when they face their circumstances or problems in life. They do this. They first start with pervasive. The problem reaches far and wide. This is not just an isolated incident. The best explanation is everyone is in on it. It's pervasive. It's everywhere. The second thing they go is to another level, and they say, this problem's because of me. There's something wrong with me. The best explanation is that somehow I'm responsible. And he does actually something different. He compares himself to his ancestors, to those who went before him. He's like, I'm nothing compared to those who went before me. At least Elijah, or at least Moses could lead the people out of Egypt. I can't even turn these people's heart back to you. And he's getting to this like personal. This is personal for him. Third is this permanent, the permanency of it. This problem will last a long time. There's little to be changed. The best explanation is that I will have to live the rest of my life like this. I mean, that leads to a place of hopelessness, a place of depression. But it's something that I think we need to learn from. If we're doing this, you just need to reverse them. You need to realize it's not pervasive. It is an isolated incident. It's not personal. And it's not permanent. There is choice in this. Things can change. So just reverse those P's. Now, some call this being realistic. But how many times have we had conversations just like this? We catastrophize the event until we convince ourselves that everyone's in on it, we're responsible, and my life will always be like this. But what are you doing here? Moods take us to places that we have a hard time justifying. But we do justify ourselves, don't we? We're experts at making other people feel for us. It's kind of, we want that sympathy. We want people to understand us. And our moods often take us to places that are kind of unexplainable. And this is why God, I believe, came back around and asked himself this question again. Now, listen, God, he's big enough to take your problems. He's big enough and he's truthful enough to handle your honesty. If you're mad at God, I would say, be honest with them. And this is what he didn't do. You don't see God correcting him. You don't see that here. That correction, because it's not true, he's not the only one. There's actually 10,000 that have not bended their knee to Baal that are still for God, but he doesn't see that right now. But this is not a time for God to be like, you're wrong. Your feelings are so wrong. You're so wrong. Let me straighten you out, buddy. He doesn't do that. In fact, he shows him. And it's such a powerful and important thing that God shows him something different. So if we're going to change our moods, if we're going to be able to manage our moods, we need to understand moods are normal. Moods change as we move. And third, and finally, moods melt in the presence of God. Moods melt in the presence of God. He says in verse 11, the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. I love this imagery that's about to happen. It says, a hurricane wind ripped through the mountains and shattered the rocks before God. But God wasn't to be found in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. But God wasn't in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire. But God wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a gentle and quiet whisper. When Elijah heard the quiet voice, he muffled his face with his great cloak, went to the mouth of the cave and stood there. A quiet voice asked, so Elijah, now tell me, what are you doing here? I love that. I love it. This experience is otherworldly. Elijah is literally feeling the walls of the cave move as the wind is going before him. He feels the rocks as they're coming down, as the earthquake shaking this mountain, this mighty mountain, and he's feeling this, his world is moving. And then he feels the heat of this fire, this intensity, and he's realizing God's not in any of those things that are making him feel this way. What is God in? He's in a gentle whisper, a non-threatening whisper. Non-threatening whisper, piercing through all of those emotions that he's going through and speaking this question again. He's like, no, you didn't hear me. What are you doing here? And he actually comes out of the cave, stands at the mouth, and it's like he's ready now for whatever God might say to him. So God asks him this question. He repeats verbatim. His story hasn't changed, but Elijah's changed. He's changed by this experience. He's realizing, God, you're real. You're more real than the wind on my face. You're more real than the world shaking around me. You're more real than the intensity of the fire that I'm going through. It's in your word that I will trust. God speaking a whisper to him. And this is where God is, that God is more truthful than our emotions. And we need to go before him in the presence of God if we want to have that mood melt. I mean, it's just amazing. When somebody's experiencing some minor depression, a hug, guys, a hug, a smile, a kind word lifts their spirits. It changes their mood. It melts whatever they were going through. How much more does the presence of God have a power to contain whatever, or not contain, but to come against those emotions and tell you what is true? So God spoke to Elijah and brought his presence into his pain, and something happened. His mood had melted. He came out of his cave, stood before the Lord, and said, I'm ready now. I'm ready. And I love this. I'm not going to go into any more of this. We're done here. I have the worship team come up. We're going to just have a few songs to point our attention to him, because I think that the only proper response is to come into his presence, to allow him to change our hearts, to melt our moods, to move us out of these moods. You may be finding yourself in a mood today. You may be finding yourself in a high mood. You're good. You're like, this sermon, I'll pocket this for when I'm going through rough times. But if you're in a time, in a season of life, and it seems like you're not managing your emotions are managing you. And you realize, yes, I have a choice. And today, we kind of go back to that. Am I going to praise God in the storm, or am I going to stay in this self-defeated attitude? And I love what God says to him next. Once he gets his response again, he says, go. Go. Don't stay down in the dumps. Don't stay in this cave. Don't stay in a defeated position, Elijah. Go. And we see from there he goes. He speaks the truth to those in the powerful positions. He raises up Elisha, and we see him taken up in a chariot of fire. That's how his story should end. His story shouldn't end in the wilderness. His story shouldn't end in the times and the seasons where these moods have taken him. See, God is greater. He comes to you. He ministers to you. He replenishes you and brings you out of those. So today, let's go into a time of praise and worship. If you want to physically change your positions, move, I invite you to come forward. You don't have to have people praying for you, but this is a time between you and God, a place where you can kind of hide yourself in the cleft of the rock as God passes before you, to sing songs and reflect on who he is, and allow his whisper, to allow time in your life for his whisper to speak to your heart, to melt that mood that you're in, so that you can go on in that purpose that he has for you.